My name is Liam Walsh, and I'm a licensed paralegal just outside of Toronto, Canada. The reason I've decided to make this video is in light of a horror story that I experienced with a particular airline with requesting a simple disability seating accommodation. And we've seen in the news lately various troubling things with airlines. Um, a man forcibly removed from his seat by airport police, and also another instance on the same airline that first incident occurred on. Um, a paying first class passenger threatened with handcuffs if he didn't get out of his first class seat to accommodate somebody who was more important than him. These actions by airlines are absolutely egregious, and quite frankly, this is nothing new. Um, as you can see, airlines, quite frankly, go a little bit too far to meet their bottom line. And as you will see in my case here, um, sometimes things just go way too far. And essentially, I feel this has to stop. There has to be more regulation in the industry to prevent things like this from happening. And quite frankly, what I went through could have very well turned into a fairly serious problem. And in my case, I was very lucky that a few individuals took proactive steps to prevent anything from happening. But clearly, as you can see, this is something that should never have been done in the first place. Um, so just a little background on myself. I'm a high-functioning autistic person, and as part of this, I have something that is called one of a few things. It's called either misophonia or 4S syndrome, or common names for this. And essentially what that is it's a sensitivity to various sounds and visuals that are associated with it, or both. It could be a combination of one, the other, or both that might affect someone. And it's something I've lived with for many years, and quite frankly, there's nothing that I can do about it, um, and apart from simply avoiding what triggers me. And I will put some, at least one or two links in the uh, description below so that you can get some more information on this condition. And it's actually come up a few times in the news lately. Um, and I mean, I've had this for many years, and there have been various things that I've been sensitive to. And among the more notable ones, um, I was sensitive to the sound of silverware clanging on dinner plates. And that would just completely set me off. Even if I was on, say, the third floor of the house, it would still frustrate me when my parents were eating dinner. Just because of the sound of that. I would literally have to go in the backyard outside in order to not hear it. And then there were instances where was a period of time where I couldn't go into laundromats because of the way some front-load washing machines sounded when they went onto the spin cycle. The sound somehow set me off. And another interesting one, the sound of vacuum packaging machines, like the kinds used in delis to package like sliced meats and cheeses. The sound of those set me off for a while, so the local deli that existed near me, we had a little arrangement where I would knock on the window and they would stop doing it. They'd make sure that they weren't packaging anything, and they would just stop for a few minutes while I was in there, and obviously continue once I left. Very nice of them. But as you can see, this has been a very frustrating thing for me over the years. What affects me most nowadays is gum chewing, and the sound of somebody chewing gum, the visuals, and especially when somebody pops it, will set me off. The popping is the absolute worst thing you can do around me, and also chewing it is extremely bad around me, and I could be left with, feelings of anger and anxiety and all these horrible feelings, sometimes for hours, and I occasionally even have to shut myself in my house for a day after being triggered too many times. It's just I feel like I don't even want to leave the house. And I mean, I worked in retail for many years. Eventually, I was not able to do this anymore because of the sensitivity. Um, Clearly, it was affecting me, and I mean, thankfully, I was undergoing a career change at the time, getting into a new profession, and thankfully, in this new profession, I can do just about everything from home, with the exception of a few things. If I do have to go to court, in theory, those are supposed to be gum-free places. So, and they are for the most part. But anyway, what this is about is flying, so I won't get into too much detail with respect to the other stuff. So a little background on what happened. I had saved up enough points for a business class ticket to go to Europe, and I wanted to reward myself for a job well done at school. And essentially, I had already had stuff booked, but then, I mean, the problem with award tickets is sometimes availability can be very tight. I had originally been booked on something where I would have to make a very awkward connection. Um, and I was obviously looking for ways to improve that, and this opportunity came up to have a much better connection. So I paid a fee to change my ticket, and this new segment was on Swiss Airlines. Certainly, they had really nice commercials, and I was, really excited because it looked really nice. Um, and well, it turned out to be just a major horror story, even just getting something accommodated that really should not be an issue and doesn't pose any undue hardship whatsoever. Um, Certainly, at most, it would be a business inconvenience, but um, it was nothing, extraordinary that I was asking for. So I made my change, and then I called up Swiss to ask for seating accommodations. And the seating accommodations that I need are a bulkhead seat. And the reason for this is because it provides the most isolation from the triggers around me. Um, and certainly with the design of the seat, especially with it being so tucked away, it was definitely the best thing. This I was asking for primarily, if possible, a seat in the forward business class cabin of their A330, which only has 2 rows, and also it had some single seats in there, and there was one or two in particular that were quite isolated and would suit me extremely well. And at the time that I had requested these seats, they were not taken. Um, anyway, I called up Swiss, and I asked to be seated there, and they basically told me, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, those seats are reserved for our elite frequent flyers." And I basically said, "But your website does say that you offer disability seating upon request." And basically they're like, "Oh, well, we can submit a request to our revenue department," and they used the term revenue department. Um, and Okay, by all means, submit the request. Very little information was taken at that time. And I was told that I had to call back in a couple of days to obviously confirm that this had been done. Found that a little bit strange. Normally they would call you back, but I don't know, or you'd expect that. So I did that, and I was basically told that my request was denied with very little explanation given apart from, well, basically you don't qualify for that. Certainly I wrote a few strongly worded letters to SWISS as a result. I think some of them were to the CEO and a few other places. Eventually, I was also making phone calls, and I eventually got through to a supervisor who agreed to assign me the seat. This supervisor was quite understanding, and she agreed to give me the seat that I needed. So essentially, I thought all was good. And then, shortly after, I get an email. And I have these emails here, and I'm going to show you what they say. Now, these emails are from not SWISS themselves, but an outsourcing company named MindPearl that they use, obviously disguised as them, but these are foreign agents that don't seem to have much of an understanding of the disability laws and whatnot, and I'll get to those a bit later. So this is the first letter, and I'm going to hold this up so you can read it, and feel free to pause. Alright. So this email is from a gentleman named Benjamin Constant, who apparently lives in South Africa, doesn't work for MindPearl anymore, hasn't for a few years apparently. But basically it says, we wish to apologize for the lack of care in our agent's response on the phone. Yeah, the first agent did seem quite inexperienced. And procedures can be quite strict, and it is not always easy for the newest agents to know when exceptions apply, however obvious it might appear in hindsight. Basically, it's saying we've booked that seat for you. Although your rights and freedoms are in no way impinged upon here in respect to our seating policy, we have decided to allocate the seat to try and make your flight as pleasant as possible, as there is no doubt, of course, that your condition is not trivial in any way. Okay? But where I got a bit concerned is when it says, please note that our doctor was not convinced that the bulkhead would make a significant difference to your comfort, and that you could still be reseated in the event one of our honorary members should request a seat such as yours, and she or he could not be convinced to utilize another one. Okay. It goes on to say that you can rest assured, however, that we will do our best to explain the situation to the member who would make such a request so that you can keep your seat. I was very irked by this response, and for a variety of reasons, including, well, first of all, no one ever told me they were submitting my information to a doctor. They clearly used the term revenue department. They didn't. I find it hard to believe that a medical department is part of revenue. It doesn't make much sense. I know for sure that that's not the case in very many airlines, but maybe it is in SWISS. I don't know. Be a little biased if you ask me. And what really irked me with the aspect of the whole doctor thing, saying that it wouldn't make a significant difference to my comfort. This doctor I never even talked to, and they seem to have made their decision on almost no evidence whatsoever. I wasn't asked to submit any medical documentation or anything. Never even spoke to this doctor, never even was given an opportunity to perhaps provide one of the fantastic letters that are on misophonia.com or anything like that, which usually provides a very good explanation as to my condition and how it affects me. So, what also kind of got me a little worried was the fact that they would actually tell somebody that I have a disability. That's really, I think, a little bit extreme. Basically, I find it very hard to believe that they would do something like that. It's really gives me just a thought, well, are any privacy laws being breached by this? It's a bit concerning. And it just does not seem right. Of course, following this, I think there were some more letters that I sent out. This time I also contacted the CEO, and here is the response that I got. Now, this is from somebody named Ajay Harani, who is apparently in their customer service department. I'm assuming a MindPearl employee as well, possibly in Fiji. That's my best guess. So, there's the email. Basically telling me that my email to the CEO was forwarded to him for reply, claiming that they regret that they're unable to accommodate me in the manner that I wish. It's not that they're unable to, it's just because they don't want to. It says also, we do our best to accommodate the special needs of our passengers. We take our responsibilities to passengers with disabilities very seriously and recognize our obligation to facilitate their needs and make their journey as comfortable as possible. If we are not able to meet their preferences, we endeavor to provide reasonable accommodation for a pleasant flight experience. It's not a matter of preference that I have to sit at the front bulkhead there. It's really a necessity, as you will see in this, how everything affects me. It's quite a necessity. Our staff is very much aware of and compliant to disability laws. I really would disagree with that. I don't think any of these agents read the Canadian Transportation Agency's rules with respect to this, which actually clearly state that business inconvenience does not equal an undue hardship. And it says here, per standard procedures, your file was viewed by our medical department when you voiced your disability. Your condition is not deemed as a medical case where we need to guarantee specific seating to your preference. Again, I would beg to differ on that. Also, going back to the fact that their medical department never even contacted me and relied solely on a few words by a very inexperienced agent. And it's basically saying, yes, however, in an effort to make you comfortable, we've given you that seat. But we reserve the right to move you for operational or commercial reasons. And as we know, with the stuff that's been happening as of late, commercial reasons could mean you might be forced out of your seat to make way for somebody more important. And I think the previous email by Mr. Constant makes this quite clear. What would happen if that happened? They wouldn't tell me. Would I be forced off the flight? I don't know. Would I be forced to move to economy if there's no other seats? available in business? I don't know. It was quite confusing, and I attempted to seek further clarification after this, as I will explain. And it says here, we believe Swiss's policy regarding seating accommodations does not constitute an undue obstacle versus your mobility and is fully compliant to Canadian law, which requires carriers to make reasonable accommodations. They are not making reasonable accommodations. And again, going back to the start of this, I was never asked to submit any medical documentation, and I could have. We are not obliged to assure a bulkhead seat if we can accommodate your needs in a different manner, such as perhaps having a seat next to you free if the flight is not full. Not really sure what that would do. But please understand that we cannot guarantee a pleasant sounding zone on our aircraft. Clearly, that sentence means you don't know anything about my condition. The sound of the airplane itself doesn't bother me. It's the visuals and sound of gum chewing that sets me off. And clearly, this individual is very ill-informed, and clearly this airline doesn't care either. And basically, they say, oh, well, we've done their utmost to provide you a reasonable solution to meet your special needs, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, we can't do anything further for you. And obviously later I attempted to seek clarification on various things, such as, what would happen if I was forced out of that seat. Essentially, I was not able to get any answers. I was basically told eventually, oh, we're going to stop communicating with you. I was hung up on several times by agents, and in addition to that, I was basically eventually told, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to communicate with us through your travel agent. We're not speaking to you anymore. I felt that that was absolutely horrific. And at that point, I said, enough's enough. And I decided to involve Aeroplan, where I had gotten my ticket. Obviously, at first there, I couldn't get any luck with the low-level agents, but knowing me and being a little persistent, I decided to see if I could contact one of the bigwigs. And yes, I did get a response from the executive office. A very nice lady contacted me and, asked me about what was going on, and asked me to send these emails to her and as well explain what happened, which I did. And let's just say she was not very happy with what she was seeing, and she was extremely horrified and basically said, they can't do this. I've been here many years, and, clearly they don't understand their obligations, and basically she offered to waive all change fees and find me a different flight. This, of course, wasn't exactly easy because, there was very limited availability. They were really stuck with what was available for award seats, except, as I'll get into, something was done, but first option I was given was an Air Canada flight, but that would have cost me several $100s in carrier surcharges, which are applicable to certain flights, including Lufthansa and Austrian and Air Canada flights. And in the case of this transatlantic flight, it was, as I said, about $400 or $500. I forget. It was extreme and extortionate, and unfortunately, no exception could be made to that because thanks to Air Canada and their silly rules in that regard. I basically said, that's I can't really afford. Another option was an inconvenient routing through Brussels and New York on Brussels Airlines. The problem with that at first was there were no seats available from New York to Toronto on that day at that time that I needed it. Luckily, the lady agreed to contact Air Canada's Revenue Management Department and see if anything could be done. And thank goodness, Air Canada was very considerate of my circumstances and agreed to release one seat on one of the later New York to LaGuardia to Toronto flights. I was very grateful that they agreed to do that in these circumstances. They didn't have to, but I will certainly commend them for that. And the flight over on transatlantic was on Brussels Airlines, and I'd used them before and didn't have any problems. Used them on a previous trip to Europe, and they were fantastic. And quite frankly, they were also fantastic in this case too. Um, and I got the seating accommodations I needed without any hassle whatsoever. There was no dumb request to their medical team or anything. I just simply said, "This is what I need," and they're like, "Oh yeah, no problem." There was absolutely no difficulty at all. It was a great flight. No complaints in that regard. And oh, what can I say? This was a terrible experience with Swiss. Um, if you've got a disability, don't fly Swiss. That's the long and short of it. They will find some way to basically refuse what you need. It's not nice. I will note that shortly after all of this happened, a few months after, they actually kicked a family with an autistic child off of a plane, um, and I was quite horrified with that. So clearly, they don't know how to handle autistic passengers. Now, you're probably asking yourself, which airlines are good with autistic passengers? Well, in my experience, Air Canada is pretty good. I, quite frankly, have never been charged extra for a bulkhead seat. It's just a simple matter of calling their medical desk and explaining your circumstances. Then you've got another, Brussels Airlines, obviously, was pretty good. An airline in the States that I can particularly recommend is Southwest. I absolutely love Southwest. And in fact, even on really cheap flights that I've taken to Florida, I recently went for $59 each way to Florida just a few months ago and had a fantastic experience both ways. Flight attendants were amazing at dealing with my condition. It was unbelievable. And another honorable mention, which isn't an airline, is Eurostar. When I was in Europe on my trip in 2015, this was, I would say, probably one of the best experiences I've ever had with accommodations for my needs. I had contacted Eurostar in advance to advise them of my issues, as we'll call them, and they basically told me, okay, show up early and go to this desk instead of the main check-in or whatever. So I did, and in like a minute, somebody came out and basically took me quickly through everything. Took me to the front of the line for all the passport control and all of that, and took me right into their fancy lounge that they have for the high-paying passengers, and said I could wait here if I wanted to. And wow, that was really nice of them. And this wasn't even an expensive ticket I was on. This was a very, very cheap one. And and even before the train's general boarding, they took me on, instead of taking me to my assigned seat in wherever it was, I was taken to a different car. They got out a key, opened a door in front of me to this small compartment that had 3 seats in it, and basically said, "You're traveling in here today." I was shocked. It was just amazing. It was essentially like a free upgrade to first class because the seats were the same as first class, but and I didn't have to ride with anyone else. It was just absolutely wonderful. I had no complaints whatsoever about that. Coming back from London, I was also able to use the lounge, and I was still put through everything very quickly. I wasn't able to use the this small room, but at least the train wasn't busy, and I did eventually find a spot that there was no one triggering me, so that was a pretty comfortable ride too. Um, in closing, please avoid Swiss Airlines, especially if you have a disability. Clearly, they want to put the priorities of their the rich snobs ahead of persons with disabilities. They could care less about the needs of somebody quite clearly. Um, and as I said, there's some great ways to travel if you do have this condition. Travel, of course, isn't easy for me, but having these supports makes it that much easier for me. Anyway, thank you for watching, and also, while I just at the end here, I did complain to the Canadian Transportation Agency. I essentially demanded an apology for the horrible treatment that I received, and essentially Swiss basically gave me 10,000 Aeroplan miles and a small amount to cover that previous change fee and I guess the taxi between JFK and LaGuardia. Um, I never signed a full and final release for this, and quite frankly, I'm still pissed off at them. Rightfully so, especially after seeing all these things that we've seen lately, and quite frankly, I feel compelled to talk about it. And certainly, if Swiss is watching this, if you want to talk about this a bit further and give me that apology that I am seeking, um, just contact me at the messaging link through the site, and I'd be pleased to speak to you. Thank you, and have a great day.